The preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening. Happy Valentine's Day. My name is Robert Gilson. I direct the Art Center at the 92nd Street Y. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our programs, we offer over 150 courses and workshops each semester in fine arts, fine crafts, and photography. If you are unfamiliar and are interested, the whole Y catalog in the lobby will give you information on our program. Our speaker this evening is Roy Lichtenstein. Mr. Lichtenstein was one of the seminal figures in the pop art movement in the 1960s, and his reassessment of vernacular imagery helped to define a new aesthetic. This is the second program in this year's Artist Vision Lectures series. Our next event will be on Thursday, April 25th, when Eric Fischel and April Gornick will be here with us. This series will conclude on May 5th with Ellen Zimmerman. I hope you'll join us for the rest of the series. Our moderator for Artist Visions is Nan Rosenthal. Ms. Rosenthal is curator of 20th Century Art at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. In that capacity, she has been responsible for several important exhibitions, including the drawings of Jasper Johns, A Century of Modern Sculpture, 7 American Masters, and a retrospective celebrating the 10th anniversary of the gallery's East Wing. A noted author and lecturer, Ms. Rosenthal has published dozens of articles and catalog essays. She is the author of several books and book-length catalogs, and she is currently writing a book about Robert Rauschenberg. Our format this evening will be as follows. Nan Rosenthal will introduce Roy Lichtenstein. Roy will then give a slide presentation of his work. At the end of the presentation, there will be a brief pause while the stage is reset up. Then Roy will be joined on stage by Nan for a discussion about Roy's work and his ideas. The discussion will be followed by a question and answer period where Mr. Lichtenstein will respond to audience questions selected and presented by Nan Rosenthal. If you would like to pose a question, please write it legibly on the index card you received upon entering. The ushers will collect them after the slide presentation. Thank you for coming this evening. It's my great pleasure to introduce Nan Rosenthal. Please help me in welcoming her.
Bob, thank you. And my apologies for not being here last week, but unanticipated surgery prevented it. I suppose it was a kind of preparation for aspects of this evening because as I entered the operating room a few weeks ago, my surgeon, completely to my surprise, initiated a conversation with me about the High-Low exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. And as I was lying there, it emerged that he had gone to Williams College with Kirk Varnadoe, the curator of that show. Anyway, this conversation, which I was meant to be a participant in, continued until I sank into the oblivion of anesthesia. And I felt a little like I'd rather sink than call Brad for help, to quote one of Roy's early paintings. I discussed with my husband yesterday the problem of how to introduce a man as famous, as respected, and as cherished by his colleagues and friends as Roy Lichtenstein. My husband suggested that since Roy's work exploits the spectator's recognition of the familiar, the known, often cliches, I could as well, and I could say in full cliche, he needs no introduction. Judging from the size of this audience, that is completely true. Nonetheless, I will quickly remind you that Roy Lichtenstein was born in Manhattan in 1923. He was raised here, attended the Franklin School where he was interested in science, but at the same time occasionally made art at home. The summer he graduated from high school in 1940, he took classes with Reginald Marsh at the Art Students League. He went to college, got his Master's of Fine Arts, and taught at the School of Fine Arts at Ohio State. This was interrupted from 1943 to 1946 by service in the Army in Europe. He had his first one-man show in New York in 1951, and between 51 and 57 worked in Cleveland as a graphic draftsman and engineering draftsman, a window designer, and a sheet metal designer. This is something I'd like to ask him more about later. He was painting images of American history scenes in the far West in a kind of quasi-expressionist style, and in the late 1950s painted briefly in an abstract expressionist style. During the cusp of the late 50s and early 1960s, a fascinating moment in the history of American and European art, he taught at SUNY Oswego and at Rutgers. He began using cartoon images and techniques derived from commercial art in the late 1950s, first in drawings, some of which he'll show us, and he made his first painting based on popular image in 1960, a work called Look, Mickey. It derived from a bubblegum wrapper image belonging to one of his sons. In early 1962, he had his first show of works based on popular imagery at Leo Castelli's gallery. The next year, he moved back to New York, and the following year gave up teaching to paint full-time. He has lived here and in Southampton, Long Island, where he first moved in 1970, ever since, in various neighborhoods, most recently the West Village, in a wonderful house where he kind of lives over the store on a floor above his studio, with a wonderful painting leading up to it. The trajectory of his work since 1961, from pop imagery to quotation of modernists he admires, Picasso, Matisse, Mondrian, Brancusi, and so on, in their most recognizable forms, to the widening of his work to include sculpture, even the decorative arts, and the reproductive art par excellence, apart from photography, printmaking. He will discuss with slides in his talk that follows, and I will then pose some questions and then pose some of yours. Two further notes. As you look at Roy's slides, I think he's showing this one. It is worth recalling a small group of paintings from the 1960s. The subject, which ranges across the entire canvas surface, is a dime store notebook, one of those black and white things with a binding and hard covers that says compositions. Let the word, Roy's pun, be your guide, and watch his compositions as the slides go by. The second note, when you see the first slide, rejoice. Thanks to Roy's generosity, this really key historic work now belongs no longer to him, but to all of us, for he has just given it to the National Gallery of Art in honor of the gallery's 50th anniversary, which is coming up in a couple of weeks on St. Patrick's Day in lieu of Valentine's Day. And we in Washington are very thrilled about that. And thank you very much.
Hi, I don't really have any speech. I'm going to get right on to showing you an interminable list of slides, and the ushers will wake you up after the things are over. But if I go through these slides, we'll know what we're talking about when I have a discussion with Nan and answer some of the questions that you will write, I hope, and there we can get into more interesting conversation, I hope. Anyway, I think we'll just start right out with Look Mickey, which is the first slide. Should we deliver the ordinance? Let's see. What do I do for slides? Push something here? How's that? Ah, look at that. Okay. This is the first pop work I did. And as Nan said, I was looking at a bubblegum wrapper. At least that's the way I remember it now. And I was, before I did this, I was working in a kind of abstract expressionist way, or at least it seemed that way to me. I don't think it seemed that way to abstract expressionists. And I have nothing left of that period except some drawings. I used the paintings that were of this subject as mats on the floor to prevent messing the room up. But unfortunately, there are none of the paintings left, but maybe it isn't too unfortunate, but this is one of the drawings of Mickey, and it just gives you an idea of the degree of abstraction involved. And this is one of Donald Duck. And it occurred to me somewhere along the line, because of many influences, I suppose, that to do it without the artistic line, to have it look the way a cartoon might look, really, without putting obvious artistic textures in it, just seemed like an idea. And after that, I did various kinds of simple-looking commercial art and things from cartoons covering various subjects. And maybe I should name some of these paintings, because if someone wants to refer to it later. But this is a 1962 painting called Blam. And this was a diptych called the Eddy diptych. And that was done in 1962 as well. And the idea of making usually diptychs were religious paintings or something like that, but to make this kind of subject this way and to use this much writing seemed interesting at that moment. I'm going through these rapidly because I just want you to get a kind of general overall impression of the work I did. This is called Large Spool, and it was done in 1963. And it reminded me of Frank Stella, and it was an illustration that looked very much like this. All of these are done from illustrations that look surprisingly like these. This is this is called Composition 1, and it was done in 1964, and conveniently has the word compositions on it, so you know it has something to do with art, and conveniently looked vaguely like Pollock or some sort of overall subject. And the work itself, the canvas could be the same character as the thing. In other words, the edge of the book would have these proportions, and so it had a kind of object quality, which is something that was an idea of the 60s, I think, that recurs in many people's work. I tried to do various subjects, and I did this is one of, I think, 5 works I did after Picasso. And, of course, the problem's a little different because the subject matter here isn't low art. Let's say the subject matter is high art, but I'm converting it into what I consider my vocabulary, and it looks like a fake Picasso or a plain pipe rack Picasso, or however you want to look at it, but it's obviously not really a Picasso. But of course, I feel I've converted it into my own language and produced actually a completely different painting, but I don't think it quite looked that way at that time. This is Woman with Flowered Hat in 1963. This could use some focusing, I think. The idea of using brushstrokes, which is a kind of romantic idea, a gesture, a bravura act, to do it meticulously or in a classical mode seemed an interesting idea because it would symbolize painting in general, which are brushstrokes on canvas, and has a large history, since the Venetians. And I did a number of these brushstroke paintings and then reused the subject later in different ways. This is another let's see, well, the first one was called, I guess, Big Painting number 4, and this one's called Brush Strokes in 1965. Moving right along here, in 1967, well, this isn't modular painting, but it would be nice if it were. It's called, I guess I called it modern painting, with 3 circles, 1967. I began to do things that dealt with Art Deco themes and did various paintings in that way. Oh, pushing the wrong button, of course. There we go. I did a group of paintings, and this is called modular painting with 4 panels. I did, I don't know how many, but quite a number of various paintings like this. The interest being to do 4 identical paintings and have them form one composition, I hope. And it was a sort of an interesting problem, and was something I think we were sort of forced to do in drawing class in public school at one time, because that wouldn't be so far from the 20s. And I remember filling the page with these kinds of things, but I liked the idea at the time. This was a 1970s painting. I tried various other things, landscapes made of a material called Rolox. That's a product name of a kind of optical plastic that, as you move, changes its space or its lighting or something. It has a certain depth to it, and it reflects light in different ways as you move. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And to use this modern material to make landscapes, I made a number of landscapes. Some of them were motorized, where the horizon kind of went up and down slowly and made you seasick. And some had picture lights over them, and the light sort of rotated and made different colors that were supposed to resemble the sun rising and falling, so you'd get daytime and nighttime. Something I'd seen somewhere in a restaurant with a different kind of a mural. This is 1964. In 1971, pretty much after the Art Deco things, and maybe coming out of them, I did a group of mirror paintings, which were pure abstractions, but had made some allusion to mirrors. The things I had to work from were commercial art brochures of airbrushed mirrors. So to translate these into this sort of comic book or simplified vocabulary that I used in all of these, came up with this kind of symbolism, which somehow reminds you of a mirror if I tell you it does, I guess. Another version. They weren't all oval. Some were rectangular, some were panels, and so forth. Anyway, this is mirror number 3 and done in 1971. And then I wrote, let me see, I went into still lifes around 1962, and this is a still life with goldfish, having a Matisse influence. I'm sure he loved the idea. And, and this is still life with goldfish, so forth. And, it alludes to a golf ball painting I had done in 1961. It has some Matisse leaves in the upper left, and some beautiful grapefruit and lemons. Also did trompe-l'oeil paintings in 1973, and this is this trompe-l'oeil painting would fool no one, I'm sure, but okay. Has a little allusion to Leger and other things out there. Okay. Called Studio Wall, 1973. This is 1973 artist studio, Look Mickey, it's called. And it's the use of an earlier painting of mine, which you saw, and in a kind of made-up artist studio also. The idea of the artist studio coming from Matisse, and there's a sort of Matisse vase or something in the middle with some rhododendrons or some kind of growth coming out of it, and a mirror and a stand that Matisse used, but it has a telephone on it, and that telephone was also done in an early painting of mine. And there's a canvas back picture, which is another group of work I did up against the door there. And the things on the Look Mickey and the other paintings are reminiscent of early paintings that I did. The thing about putting a painting in a painting is something that interests me, because you've seen many painters that put paintings of theirs into paintings, Matisse being one, and usually they're referred to in a sort of expressionist or impressionist way. But when I put it in, of course, there's no remove from it, there's no atmosphere, it's just stuck on there, and it's the same as doing the painting again. And I like that directness and lack of distance and, well, apparent lack of subtlety. Of course, since you can't see the subtlety, you realize how subtle it really is. This is a 1964 painting, The Red Horseman, and it's after Carlo Carra's Red Horseman. It's a little gouache that he did, but this is a rather large painting and encompasses everything there is to know about futurism. Okay. Another futurist work done in 1975 called The Atom. A quite different kind of thing done in 74. I did a group, quite a large group of entablatures. Earlier I did some entablatures that were all black and white. They were maybe some of them 20 feet long and maybe only 2 feet high, very long entablatures. Then I did some that had color. A lot of this is silver and some has sand in it, so there's some texture. Nothing like a little art in there, but the kind of contrast between the stony texture and the bare canvas color with dots and various things. It's related a little bit to minimal art and some kinds of color field art. In my mind, it made those references, but the use of Greek, Roman classical motifs was just interesting to me at that time, and to make these kind of paintings anyway. This is another of the same kind, called entablatures. This is a series, 1976, of things I call office furniture still lifes. And they mostly come from ads for office equipment, file folders, flexible lamps, various metal tables and things like that. The things I used to design at Republic Steel, when I did that. I guess I like the hardness or the brittleness or the lack of romance or whatever it is that's involved with those. Then, in 77, we get to surrealism, and this is Reclining Nude, and looks like a slice through a Henry Moore. But I use a brushstroke for a cloud and use certain things I've done before, but in a slightly altered context so that it just has some kind of surrealist sense. I've done a self-portrait that is a mirror and a kind of suit and tie and things like that, and I put him in there. Another surrealist one. Can you hear this okay? Okay. Too well? This is Stepping Out, another member of the surrealist group. Then in 1979, I did a group related to German Expressionism, and this is called Dr. Waldmann. And it's about 60 by 50 inches and so forth. Another German Expressionist head. Then went into a kind of Indian version of surrealism. Max Ernst did that a little bit, and it kind of got me interested. And I had done things of cowboys and Indians in the 50s, so it related somewhat to my earlier work, which isn't known very well, luckily. I think this is two figures with teepee. 1979. This is a drawing called Powwow. No, it isn't called Powwow. It's called something else. I don't know. But it is an Indian surrealist. At least that's what I think it is. And it gets motifs from Indian blankets and various things and rearranges them into personages and little things, some of which are not actually Indian designs, but are canoes or teepees or something that will give you that feeling. This is talking about the brushstrokes earlier. I started to use brushstrokes to make objects, and this is 2 red and yellow apples, in 1981. It's a small painting, 24 by 24, and tries to use a cartoon brushstroke to delineate those apples and various other things, shadows and whatever goes around it. And some of them are simply allusions to expressionist brushstrokes. Then I almost got into art here, where I began to use real brushstrokes along with cartoon brushstrokes to make paintings, and I have this enormous interest in using brushstrokes because it symbolizes a lot, which maybe we'll talk about. And this is called Sunrise, and it's done in 1984. Whatever this is has nothing to do with what's written here, but it's Figures in Landscape, 1985, and I don't know if you can make them out, but they're there, a couple of figures, and using both kinds of brushstrokes. And I was actually interested in how the contrast between the two brushstrokes worked, and that was the idea there. This is about 96 by 110 inches. Then I got into a group of paintings, which were pictures of more than one painting or parts of more than one painting. And here are 2 paintings, as though the 2 paintings were in a landscape. And you just see the parts of the 2 paintings. One is my version of an expressionist abstract painting, and the other of a Picasso, and try to make them feel separate but make the thing work as a whole, we hope. And that's what happened there. This is another paintings one. There's a painting of a mirror, another kind of mirror over on your right side there, and an abstraction on the left. That's 1984 and called Paintings Mirror. Then in 86, I did things called imperfect paintings. There are also perfect paintings, and what they do usually is start at any edge and draw a line to another edge and then to another edge and so forth, and that's the rule of the game. But then sometimes I make a large mistake and the line goes out of the painting altogether, and that becomes an imperfect painting. Or I just decide to go down the side of the painting with the line. What it's supposed to mean is if you had no idea what to paint and you wanted to do an abstraction, you might come up with this kind of a painting. Another of the same called Imperfect, 1986. Okay. This is a collage of the Bauhaus stairway of Schlemmer's. And it was done as a mural for Creative Artists Agency in Los Angeles. It's an IMP building. And the mural is 27 feet high, more or less. And this is the collage for that. And this is me showing off on and doing the mural in the lobby of that building. In 1988, I started doing reflections on earlier work. I had done a small painting called Wimpy in 1961, and he's the friend of Popeye who likes hamburgers. You know. And reflections on it means that the painting is painted as though it were under glass and had a frame around it, and the reflections from the glass prevent you from seeing the painting. It's just a way of doing an abstraction and showing enough of whatever part of the painting I feel like showing, or showing you two things at once, or something like that, whatever the idea is. I did a number of paintings, and I've been doing them for a few years. This is Reflections Mystical painting. It's 1989, 56 by 75. And it has, it's just something's going on under the reflections that you can't quite make out, and something very dramatic as well. This is reflections on the gift. There's a female group of hands and male group of hands exchanging something, and mostly reflections. It's somewhat like combining the mirrors and the cartoons in a way. This is one done in 1990, still on reflections, and I did a couple of these of Picasso's that are in the sort of 1930s room at the Museum of Modern Art. This is one of them, and same sort of treatment, just giving you an idea of the range here. And this is a collage for a painting I'm working on now, so I'm bringing you right up to date. The collage is only 26 by and a fraction by 32, but the painting is, I think, 10.5 feet by something or other. And if you hang it in your room, you will completely ruin it. And this this is the beginning sketch collage for this work. They're called interiors, and they have their origins in the phone book, the yellow pages. They're altered somewhat, and that brings us up to date, and now we can maybe talk about things. Okay. Oh, yes, there's more. We're not up to date yet. No, I haven't tortured you enough. There's sculpture. Oh, heavens, let's see. Okay. Well, this is, in 1965, I started this group of ceramic sculpture, and these are cup size, so that the size of the sculpture, it would be a sculpture of cups and saucers in their actual medium, I mean the medium they're usually done in, and with the decoration being the kind of two-dimensional marks that signify 3 dimensions, the dots and the reflections off of the cups and saucers. So I did a group of these sorts of works. Then in 1965, I did these porcelain enamel on steel. This is 88 by 60 inches, and it comes out from the wall certain 4 or 5 or more inches, but something like that. Different layers of steel or perforated steel or things like that, covered, with porcelain enamel color. Then to match the things I did in the late 60s, or early 70s, the Art Deco things, I did some brass sculpture. This is one of them. In 1977, I did painted bronze sculpture, this again from Matisse, using the sculpture stand with his fishbowl. And it's two-dimensional till it begins to get three-dimensional down there. Then a bronze cup and saucer. The black part's usually patinated black, and the paint is urethane paint. Let's see, that's about 29 inches high, something like that. This is a mirror, again, done in bronze. Mirror number 2, 1977. A lamp, I did a number of lamps. So this is lamp 1, also 1977. I've had this desire to make things that are very ephemeral into decided patterns. Of course, cartoonists themselves have had this idea. But when I do it in sculpture, I think it brings it a step further and solidifies things like light rays and reflections into more palpable forms than they almost always occur in. This is a mermaid under construction here. It's in Miami. It has, she has her own weather above her, clouds and so forth, and sun coming down and waves, and there's some water in the pool. Yeah. Let's see, that's, I think, 21 feet high or something. Another brushstroke apple in bronze. These are, very two-dimensional. They have, maybe 3/4 of an inch thickness or something. Again, the brushstrokes, another thing that's sort of more an idea than a reality, and I like it in bronze. That's why I did it. Yeah. This is 1981. A Brancusi copy of Sleeping Muse. it certainly exploits the volume of his shapes and things like that. 1984, The Conversation, a surrealist thing emphasizing the difference between men and women, I think, something like that. Mm-hmm. And this is a complicated idea of brushstroke heads. And this is, I guess you can make out 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. And so it's all made of my idea of brushstrokes. And, but it makes up a head and a sort of a hand coming out over here. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Does that do it? Looks that way, yeah. Okay.
Roy, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
That was fascinating. I wanted to go back for a minute to the beginning and look Mickey. It always, if you remember that painting, which was the first slide, Mickey is sort of laughing to himself because Donald Duck has hooked his own jacket. And even though he's saying, look, Mickey, I've hooked a big one. And it's always seemed to me that you possibly meant Mickey to be a stand-in for us, the spectator, or at any rate, a mediator between the audience who can see what's happening with dreadful thing that's happening to.
I don't know. I thought maybe it was me because when I thought of doing it, I thought I had sort of hooked a big one. It's a little pretentious, maybe, but.
That too. No doubt. I wondered if well, now the National Gallery's hooked the big one. I wonder if you would talk a little more about your actual procedure. In other words, from conception to sketch to drawing to blow up and so.
You mean in any particular work or making a painting?
How you proceed
well,
to...
let's see. I mean, some of them are quite different. When I did the brushstrokes, I did an entirely different thing than when I did the cartoons. But let's say, if I did a cartoon, I would make a drawing looking at the cartoon, and sometimes it was very much like the cartoon. Sometimes it was a head from one thing and words from another cartoon and some background from somewhere else or something I thought of putting in. And then I usually, well, at the beginning, I just drew it on the canvas and found that it was much more efficient to project it on the canvas, which I did probably 3 years into it, and then draw it and then redraw it. And that's an important part to me because I try to eliminate the subject matter in my mind completely when I redraw it. Sometimes it's upside down. and just to organize it, because in my mind anyway, the irony is that you would take a vernacular subject and do what I feel art traditionally does in organizing, more or less since the Renaissance or even before. But I don't think most people see the irony that way, but the idea of bothering, it isn't, I think, just to bring the work into a museum or a gallery to aggrandize it, but to change it into a work of art, which wasn't its primary function. I mean, in the comic strip, it's telling a story, and I don't mean it has no art, but that isn't its real function, you know. And so I try to make the drawing as strong as possible, and that to me is it's funny because it's something invisible to most people, I think. And but I think it has an effect, though, and I think it's an effect you can't tell. I mean, too easily. It's hard to know. You know, it's like playing a piano piece better or worse. It's not just whether you get the notes. And well, it's that sort of thing that I'm interested in. Anyway, I draw it, and then it depends. I might do the lines partially and do the color, or I don't have any set order to the way I do it. And I use collage when I'm working a lot to, you know, if I'm not sure of a color, or if I want something to be dots or stripes or something, and rather than put them on and then take them off, I usually...
On the sketch or on the actual
on
canvas?
the actual painting. I have printed paper with various colors and patterns that I use, and collage the painting as I go a little bit, just to, you're not always right. Many times you have to change it, but it's a lot more efficient than taking the paint off and all of that. So that's the way I do it, I guess.
With your compositions, I mean, obviously there are compositions, as in the painting composition or the early painting of the golf ball, that are single image or holistic images, a la
They're sort of anti-composition in my mind, anyway.
But then there are many, many others that seem to be, in some ways, almost traditional compositions. I mean, they could be a Claude with the tree here and the something. And I wonder...
I think I tried to make the break from abstract expressionism with things I considered not compositional, like the ball of twine you saw, or the golf ball that was in one of the other paintings, or any of those things. They were things, they seemed to have no background. Well, the idea of, you know, the whole history of art maybe ending in Pollock or Mondrian, where there's no distinction between figure and ground, and this is just a golf ball, you know, is such a, well, humorous statement, but it just seemed to go against the run of history. And but in my mind, of course, every mark is seen against its ground, and it's not really a golf ball, it's really a group of marks. But because it says things so clearly, the way the other things say cartoons so clearly, that people then anyway really believed they were simply enlarged commercial art, you know.
Actually, at what point did, I mean, obviously certain inside observers knew immediately that wasn't the case. I mean, someone like Lawrence Holloway or, but at what point did people generally begin to realize that you were modifying the...
It's hard to know, because I don't, you know, I have a limited audience I speak to, and I'm sure there are people who still think I'm doing that. And but they were right from the beginning. There were people who seemed to understand, and so
Now, you alluded before to the fact that, unlike comic strips, the paintings, well, you didn't quite say this, but it seemed to me you were saying that the paintings were not intended by you to have a narrative function. Yet, a number of them from the love comics and the war comics do seem very emotionally charged in terms of the subject matter, and in a way seem to be about love and death, like a great deal of, or most high art seems to be about love or death.
Well, I guess what I liked there was the emotion that was portrayed, but it was always done by committee. You know, somebody did the writing, somebody did the drawing, somebody filled it in. I mean, that's the way comics are done, and mine look as though they're done that way, and so they do portray love and war and all of those, but they do it by machine. You know, they're remote. They seem to be. I mean, that's the character I'm trying to get across.
And was it that was a moment where one had to undercut the sentimentality of such subjects in order to make them communicate at all? I mean, if we could laugh at...
I think it was in stark contrast to the brooding and whatever it was that abstract expressionism was about. But that was I was brought up on abstract expressionism, love abstract expressionism. So it's not that I'm against that art, it's just that I knew my work contrasted with it. I mean, you could foresee what apparent printing would do, and it sends a certain message. It also gives a different texture, and I enjoyed putting, dots against diagonals, against unmodulated color and black lines. It was playing in another key, and made, sections of it had sort of a different chord it was playing, and the contrast between what I was doing and abstract expressionism was in my mind. It was unavoidable because I had been brought up pretty much on abstract expressionism.
And we're even presumably spending some time with those artists. The earlier brushstroke paintings, the brushstroke paintings of the mid-'60s were partly addressed to abstract expressionism, presumably. Would you talk a little more about the difference between those and the ones of the 80s?
Let me see.
The cartoon brushstrokes and what you were referring to as the real brushstrokes, even though they're all made of brushes.
Yeah. Well, I've talked so many times about the history of art and the history of brushstrokes, and in Southern Renaissance painting, the brushstroke was made evident, I think, maybe starting with Titian, and it goes through, when you see it in Rembrandt, Hals, El Greco, Daumier, Van Gogh, de Kooning, the brushstroke itself as this is satin drapery, but you can see it's done elegantly with a brushstroke, and it becomes like a signature for art, and the sense of elegant brushstrokes. And of course, the cartoons were almost exactly the opposite. They look as though they were done if they were reduced with a ballpoint pen or something that had no character, no calligraphy, and that became, I think, a symbol for expressionism and for art. I mean, this kind of expressionism that always went through art. So that making a picture of a brushstroke seemed a good idea, It seemed to say the right thing. And then something less important, I think, was to use them as artificial things to make objects, and to say, well, a painting is really canvas with brushstrokes on it. And if you make them, they make an apple or something, or a cloud. And then So I did those works that had all cartoon brushstrokes. Then when I decided to combine them, I think it just made a more beautiful painting, that's all. I mean, I think that's almost the opposite of what I usually try to do. But it had a kind of, if I may say so, an elegance and beautiful surface. It almost got back to calligraphy, but it had the cartoon brushstroke to remind you that I was really only kidding about that.
And there's a brushstroke object, or actually two, that Roy didn't show you, which we happen to have on view at the gallery, where brushstrokes in bronze, there's a bronze one, and there's a bent wood one, where there's a brushstroke chair and ottoman, which are extremely comfortable, I might add. And it just struck me that there the brushstrokes were kind of a metaphor for support. I mean, you could be held up by them. One thing that, well, it's an issue that particularly fascinates me. When I was doing some work a couple of years ago on Andy Warhol, I became interested in the notion of Warhol as not so much the composer of his paintings, but what I call the art director of his paintings. And I wondered if you would talk a little bit about your work as a commercial artist in the 50s, which was quite different from Warhol's work as a commercial artist, he was a commercial graphic artist on the New York magazine scene. First of all, what exactly were you doing?
Yeah, well,
and second of all, do you think it has anything to do with your later work?
Not much. I don't think I wasn't really doing art in the window display. I was sort of dragging things through the department store for other people. And I worked for an architect for a while, things like that, in a very minor way. Well, I did models of the old city they were going to renovate, and somebody else did the new city, things like that. And I designed in sheet metal for Republic Steel. It wasn't necessarily sheet metal, but things like desks and things. It could be that drafting experience had an influence on the way I paint. Or
that's what I wondered.
It's possible. But the use of drafting, Schlemmer really is somebody who did somewhat the same sort of thing. He got rid of the elegant line, only instead of it being a cartoon line, it was a kind of draftsman's line. He's not the only one. The Russian constructivists, and many of them did things like that with drafting implements. It's the same idea, really, to get away from something beautiful and to, art, as we know, has always picked up things from the vernacular world, if that's the way to phrase it, to renew, to give itself a certain earthiness, or to get back to reality, or to get away from being too subtle or something, and trading in maybe subtlety for brashness or invention or something, but some sort of renewal.
I wondered how you would differentiate between your use of appropriation of popular images, even more images from previous works of art, quotation, appropriation, and the work of artists who today are, let's say, in their mid to late 30s, whether David Sally, Jeff Koons, just to take two quite disparate practitioners, how you would distinguish between?
I don't know, really. I would say if you took somebody like Elaine Sturdivant, who did work that really looks like other artists, that's one thing. If you take David Saleh, he uses maybe he uses a number of styles and turns it into his own work, which is what I feel I do. I use a pseudo-commercial art technique or something and turn Picasso's into that. It doesn't look like a Picasso, it doesn't look like a Matisse, it doesn't look like a Manet or a Monet, or, it looks like a cartoon version of that, and so it looks converted, and it's different from work that appear, a photograph of a photograph or something that it's very hard to tell the difference. That says something different. But I don't see a big difference. I mean, there's a huge difference in style, say, between David Salle and me, but I think that what he might be doing if he uses a work of commercial art, you just assume that's what he's doing. He may not even be doing that, but that he's turning it into his own work, and that's what I think I'm doing.
What about someone like Koons? I mean, there's such a different feeling, it seems to me.
Well, you mean somebody like silver plating a thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms.
I don't know. You see, it's very hard for me to know if you say you take an inflated rabbit, you might be able to adjust it so that you're really making a form, and then when you plate it, you can say it's obviously an inflated object, and you plate it, you're changing its material in an interesting way. Or if it is simply a plated, inflated object, in which case, then what has been done except changing the material, and maybe that has meaning, but it's entirely a different meaning. Well, there are a number of artists that I think rely on what material it is, period. I mean, but it isn't, or they may say they do, but it's very hard. I mean, you can't really believe artists for any more than you could believe critics. I mean, they all have their own.
Even less so.
I was only kidding about the critics. They have a number of them. They have their own agenda. That's something. But also, they can be honestly reading it a certain way, but it simply isn't the way anyone else will read it, or the way history will read it. And they would select certain elements out of the truth to focus on. And that's the way anyone would do it. And I have read things by artists that I love that, what they think they're doing is just has nothing to do with what I think they're doing.
I'm going to ask one more question of my own before getting to the audience questions. You showed us the new mural at Creative Artist Agencies in Los Angeles with the Oscar Schlemmer Bauhaus students going up the stairway. But you didn't show us a slide of the huge mural at the Tel Aviv Museum, which has, as I recall, two halves. Well, why don't you describe it and tell us about it? It's better.
Well, there's a number of things going on. It's a little, so let me see how big it is. I don't really remember, but it's quite a large mural. And there are people here who know how big it is. But anyway, it's divided in half because there were two panels on this wall. And the one half reflects a stairway, a kind of sloping ramp, really, that's opposite it. That's the kind of basis for its composition. And then it has artworks, some owned by the Tel Aviv Museum, and others are just some of mine and some of other people's, a little bit as though they were walking up and down the ramp. And the ramp isn't something you would see so much. It's just a collage of various works. And the other side is an imperfect painting that reflects this side. I mean, that ramp shape goes through it, and there's color and texture that matches up, but there are no objects in it. And so,
But the composition of the two.
but the
has
composition,
this
it's two things.
echo.
One echoes the other,
Yeah.
and yeah.
And further, as I recall, I was only there once, but as I recall, the museum in Tel Aviv itself has ramps.
Yeah,
does it
yeah,
not?
and that's
so
part
that,
of the composition, yeah.
And just related to that, I guess in preparing for this evening, I read some remarks you'd made in respect to your mural in the Equitable Building on 51st Street here in New York, where you appeared to be saying that murals are always supposed to be integrated with the architecture, and there you exaggerated the process.
Yeah, because I think most murals are simply murals in the architecture, and they don't really have anything to do with it anyway. But it's always nice to say that it's integrated, so I try to make it really obvious. And I don't think there's any merit in it, but I think it's amusing anyway.
I was mortified when I read that because I'd always thought how marvelous it was
Well,
that you integrated
sure
the
you're
mural with
supposed
the
to, I
architecture.
suppose.
Which, now,
Well, you can't really believe me anyway.
one of the questions from the audience would like you to discuss your handmade paper. I didn't know you did handmade.
I don't think I did.
No, I didn't think so either.
So, yeah. But
In any case,
I'd be happy to discuss it.
I think this, well, let me adjust the question a little bit. It says your handmade paper and lithography, mixed media works. I think it would be wonderful if you talked a little bit about the impulses for getting into printmaking, since your prints are absolutely extraordinary works in their own right and very complex technically.
Well, let me see. It's an enjoyable break from painting. It's something that I approach somewhat in the same way, but still there's something about the ability to, well, you draw, say, everything in black, and then it can be blue or green or whatever you want to print it in immediately, which you know, you can try out various things easily in that way. It's usually a different scale and a different, I don't know, there's something about it that I enjoy doing. It isn't really so far, I mean, theoretically it's the same. It's just that, and usually the prints come in a way after the paintings. The idea is done in the painting, and then I extend it somehow in printmaking. It's not true of these interiors. The last painting I showed you, where I did a group of prints first of those interiors, and then did the paintings later. But
that's interesting.
I would draw the same way. Usually for prints, I make a collage, which sometimes I do for a painting, if it's complex enough. Usually I make little drawings. But then the collage is a stepping off place. The print usually looks a lot like the collage, but I can sort of finish a work and then do another work that's like that and make changes in it that will, you know, I feel brings it out more. And when you really print it, it's different from collaging, you know, and the same's true in painting. I mean, the painted surface isn't the same, really, and needs adjustment. It isn't just copying from one medium to another. But I think I bring something back to painting from doing printmaking. It's
Mixing,
yeah,
mixing
it
media.
gives me ideas. I can't really name what they would be, but I feel that working in a different way just brings up other ideas.
Here's a nice provocative question. Do you think the high-low show was as bad as some of the critics said it was? And why do you think many people hated it so much?
Well, I don't think many people. I think critics hated it,
Some,
and I think that not all critics hated it, and I liked it, and not just because I was in it, but Okay. I thought there were some wonderful paintings in it, not, you know, and it was a very interesting show to go through. I'm not talking about my own paintings.
In this age of rampant appropriationism and exhaustion of the meaning of imagery, where do you envision the source of meaning in future art?
Wow. There's a serious question. Using the word rampant, of course, you could say there was rampant abstract expressionism, and there was rampant calligraphy and Oriental art. Or, I mean, you mean you don't like it? And let me get a little more serious if I can do that. Let me see what this is asking for. I don't know. No, I do. I think I might agree a little bit that appropriation, the idea of appropriation, has been with us for a while, and if someone gets something that's nominally the same idea but has more insight and brings something to it that's significant, I think, you know, it could go on for quite a while. And all art has been based on art of the past, or it might be the immediate past, but otherwise we'd all paint like children. So the whole history of art is based on art, no matter what else it pretends to do. I mean, that's something I try to say in my painting. It builds, and it isn't that one person has this enormous insight and can make things look naturalistic and create anatomy and all of that. I mean, it really took a lot of generations of artists looking at artists to achieve that. Then the idea became not so important. I mean, that wasn't maybe the meaning of art. It had an important function to get across the idea that a work of art is something seen from one point of view, and then all of the manifestations of perspective and everything that went with that. That was in opposition to, say, Byzantine art or Egyptian art or something where the symbols are one at a time. You see a group of people all lined up the same way. You don't get the idea that you're looking at a room full of people. All right, but that idea then is understood. And that idea continues into Impressionism and Post-Impressionism, but you begin to get variations in dealing with color in the way, say, that Cézanne does. You begin to alter the forms. I mean, you can't stick a bright yellow in that same way or next to red in a Rembrandt. The thing is, because it has chiaroscuro and it's saying something different. So there's an allusion to primitive art, which maybe uses color in a more quantitative way and less, less illusory. And so art begins to lose that illusion and focuses on other things. It symbolizes its own composition, which Renaissance art did too in a certain way. But so I think things become more important then. Suddenly there's the end of modernism or something like that, and it has maybe irony comes into it as an idea, or pretending not to be dealing with what is art, which is maybe what somebody like Mondrian or Pollock dealt with, or Malevich, or anyone where they're not really portraying anything. They're trying to remove everything from the painting except the art. And of course, in a way, it's impossible because the painting is always going to be evidenced in some style, so that everyone having maybe the same purpose still come out with different paintings which are personal to themselves. So now we're down to appropriation. Well, I'm saying that appropriation isn't such an unusual idea, that really people appropriated their art all through the ages. That's all that really has happened. And maybe it's saying that, and maybe it's saying something. In saying that, it might be important. On the other hand, they may not be saying that at all. They miss the point. But, or that might not even be the reason for appropriation. I mean, it's hard for me to know what somebody else's reasons are.
Well, it's reasonable maybe to say some appropriation is more conspicuous than others. I mean, more obviously.
Yeah, where they're saying appropriation. It's the same
For
sort
example,
of thing,
when
though,
you're
isn't it?
quoting your own work, it
Yeah.
becomes, let's say, even more conspicuous than.
Yeah, because I'm saying that, and I mean to be saying that. But I think it's an interesting topic. I think that maybe we've got the idea by now. That's possible.
All right.
Yeah, so.
Someone asked why you chose to use Schlemmer's, the theme of Schlemmer's Bauhaus Stairway for the CAA Building Commission in Los Angeles, and also was that commission coordinated with an architect, I mean, with Pei's office, or was it totally independent? But maybe the first part first. Why the Schlemmer for that project?
No, I was working on the stairway, painting another version of it, and when I was asked to do the mural,
The one that's in your house?
yeah,
It goes from the first floor to the second floor, hasn't it?
and then it's on the stairway, of course, but. And the idea just seemed right. I couldn't think of anything more interesting at the time, and because it looks a little bit like people going to the movies or people going to an event, and it says architecture, and because it's Bauhaus, and it's not that Pei's architecture is Bauhaus, but probably is influenced by Bauhaus architecture, but it certainly says architecture, and. I knew it would be in this unusual space because they had a model of the building which hadn't been built yet. And I don't know, the size, the proportion of it, it just seemed to be the right thing, and maybe it is, I don't know.
Do you think, this is my question, just in relation to architectural commissions, I wonder if we posit that your art usually depends in part for effect on the use of irony. Do you think that means that there are some commissions that it would be inappropriate for you to work on?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that...
I mean, a war memorial, for example.
I thought of things like that, and people have asked me to do not war memorials, but things that I just thought, well, this is, since my work always looks ironic and it's hard to think of something that doesn't have an ironic element, even the entablatures in a way. I mean, because they're not classical really, and they're really saying something amusing about minimal art, really. That, well, to do anything, say for a church or synagogue or something that is like it would just be, I think, maybe peculiar, but maybe people don't. I mean, I don't feel that mine are biting or something. Some are maybe, but that isn't the general thrust. But they're vaguely ironic, and ironic sometimes only about their own construction, not ironic about anything else.
It might be a fascinating challenge sometimes. Here's a wonderful. Your sculptures are fabulous. Where can I view them in the New York City area?
Good question. Let me see. I don't know. I mean, I don't think there are any actually around, are there?
You mean in public all the time?
In public, yeah. No, there was one on 59th and 5th for a while.
At
but
the plaza.
My gallery, Leo Castelli, has them from time to time.
Yeah, I think going into Castelli and getting up the courage to walk to the back room and asking if there are any there is a good way to find some. How about New York institutions? Are there? Does the Museum of Modern Art own any sculptures?
No, the Whitney has
does.
one. Yeah, and the Guggenheim has one of the early Art Deco things. Yeah. The Whitney has that the Goldfish Bowl. on the
Oh,
stand.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. How do you determine the size of the canvas?
I don't know. I just have a sort of idea about, well, not making something giant. Usually when paintings are big, they have more things in them, you know. But now, fairly recently, within the last few years, I've been doing the drawing that I usually do and projecting it up on a wall and just kind of getting an idea of how big I think I want the painting to be. But I have, even before that, I have a vague idea of whether I want it to be a little painting or a big painting. I may have to do with how consequential I think that subject is. You know, you can't, you can make everything huge, but some things just don't warrant it. And some things, well, to make miniatures out of a very complicated painting is something I haven't done very much, but it's an idea. I'll go home and do that.
One of your paintings sold for over $6 million. When was it painted? Don't you think artists should receive a percentage of the purchase price
Oh, yeah.
because of these unusual circumstances?
What a profound idea. I don't actually think so, but I hate to say that. I think it would be very complicated. I'm not against it, of course, but I think it might benefit the artists who need it least. I think the architect doesn't get money when you sell your house or your car. It doesn't go back to the, I mean, I don't, it's not sheet music, or books or something where the unit price is low and therefore you would make money on the number you sold, and you're always free to keep work, so it's, I mean, there are many ways of getting around it. I just don't, I'm sure most people will be for it, But I can just think of a lot of reasons against it. I'm not avidly against it, I think. It's
Actually, related to that, I presume you would, however, be in favor of artists being able to take the same tax deduction for donations that a collector used to be able to take, and
Yeah,
in
I
'91
would be
still
more-
can take.
Well, yeah, if we want to get into the financial thing, I think that it shouldn't be a bonanza because it won't float, really. But I think that because if you die, they value your work, and your estate, would have to pay for all that art in some way or other. That when you give it to a museum, you don't get anything at all, really, except what you put into it in materials. But I don't know. I mean, that's just technical stuff that doesn't have a lot to do with art.
Someone asked if you could elaborate on the art historical styles alluded to in, well, this says the reclining nude. I think that must
It's
be
that
the first
surrealist,
surrealist painting you
painting.
showed. For example, does the mountain in the background refer to the Hudson River School, and so on?
Yeah. No, I think it's, well, of course, reclining nudes were, I guess began in the Renaissance somewhere, but they also were done in Greek times, Roman times. But I don't think I was thinking that far back. I think I was simply making just aping certain things, relating my own work to the surrealist work, and using certain things I've used. Well, the brush stroke, the mirror with the, I think I've mentioned most of these things. There are little things in it. There's a little Calder drawing in it. There's, or something that looks like that to me. I can't remember all the things in it, but the little drapery, some sort of, it's just touching on little things that are used in art, and try to rearrange it to make something a different kind of painting. It obviously isn't a surrealist painting. It's really, because it really has nothing to do with the motivations of surrealism. It has nothing to do with the Freudian dream world or anything like that.
But the bizarre juxtapositions. I mean,
Yeah,
Swiss cheese with...
yeah, that's right. Bizarre juxtaposition, but that's sort of Dada, but it's also surreal. And so it alludes to that idea, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Someone's asking if the imperfections, were the imperfections in the imperfect painting series planned?
Yeah, no, of course. It's sort of, the idea of that was to set up rules and to become obvious what the rule is, and then you break it in some way by doing something. It also played on the irregular canvas, shaped canvas, except the only difference in shape is maybe a 3-inch projection or something that comes out. So that's what that is, yeah. No, but it was, as I said, it was supposed to resemble the kind of mindless abstraction you might think of if you had nothing to do. It isn't that I really think it is a mindless abstraction, but it seems not to have any important content. Of course, that's true of all my work.
Well, actually, someone asked a question that I wasn't going to ask you, which was, you speak with a tongue-in-cheek attitude towards your work and art in general. Do you take your art seriously? If you do, why? If you don't, why not?
Well, I do, but it sounds pretty corny to say that. No, I mean, the irony has nothing to do with me not liking my work. I just feel silly, praising my work or something, sitting here. But
a good question, perhaps, to end on, Roy. What do you think of the new art shown in galleries done by younger, emerging artists today, and what are the styles or artists you particularly currently respond to?
Well, I don't really see much of that, I mean, that's a way out of the question, but I don't really often go around, I don't go around enough to really have an opinion. I can't even name them, and I don't really know. I guess after Appropriations, which now only seems to be how many years old? I mean, the latest
a decade,
version.
maybe,
Well, I actually don't know the artists very well, and if you're thinking of really young artists, I guess I really am not. I don't know much. I don't, do you know?
Well,
name them all.
We're very conservative at the National Gallery. We collect Lichtenstein.
Oh, I see. God, that's conservative. Yeah.
Roy, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.